Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the recent support on all the content that we've been putting out recently. And today we're going to be taking an early look at the recent acquisitions of the trade deadline and how they've performed, and also going over the buyout market currently. A quick reminder: we do have our Discord server up and ready to, for you guys to join up. So please join if you would like to. And before we get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so let's pretty much get into so far I guess we'll start off with some of the new acquisitions for some of these teams. We'll start with I guess we'll start with Dallas, right? That was a game yesterday between them and Oklahoma City, right? So kind of a obviously Dallas is in a stretch where they need to, win some games in order to kind of create separation from the teams below them and maybe move up. And they did not disappoint, right? It was 146-111, including basically a 47-point first quarter. Obviously they weren't gonna match that point wise the rest of the way, but that pretty much kind of built up, enough of a gap between them and Oklahoma City that Oklahoma City, they cut it close a few times, but it's really hard to come back from big deficits. And so obviously Dallas's new acquisitions, right? PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, right? This is kind of what we talked about when those trades happened, why we liked it so much for Dallas, because it added some more depth and athleticism and activity to their front court, right? You saw Gafford being a lob threat, being able to get some offensive rebounds, block some shots, easy dump off passes, right? His life is going to be really easy, playing next to Luka. I mean, he was already kind of doing some of this stuff for the Wizards. It's just obviously the Wizards are a worse team, right? Same with PJ Washington, right? Where it's like, some of the stuff that he was doing for Charlotte, but again, it's worse team. You're playing with worse talent. It's kind of interesting to see Washington also handle the ball a little bit, right? Where it's like he can kind of, as like an undersized big, kind of, put the ball on the floor and make some plays, either with passes or, like some athletic moves to the basket, right? 3-point shot wise, it doesn't seem like he's quite as good of a 3-point shooter as he may have been like in his earlier seasons. He'll still get a lot of good looks. But regardless, like either way, like those front court additions, address a need that Dallas had, right? Like they needed somebody who could get them more rebounds. And you also just needed guys where it's like, Lively, whenever he was out, it was a lot tougher for Dallas, to kind of be competent, on the inside, mainly from a defensive or rebounding standpoint. So now that there's not as much of a drop off and you're not as reliant on Derek Lively to play really well as a rookie down the stretch of games, which is nice, right? Now you have other options to go to. They started Maxi Kleba in this game, right, who hadn't really been healthy this year. He's missed a lot of time, right? You almost kind of forgot he was on the team, right? And that kind of gives them another, look at a big spot as well, right? Because that's a guy that can stretch the floor, while still being pretty mobile and switchy defensively, right? So, and that's the thing with Dallas, right? Where it's like, you look at their record and it doesn't necessarily like wildly jump off the page, right? 30-23. I mean, obviously OKC is like what, the 2 seed, 35-17, but then you factor in like there's been a lot of games where they've had, either a lot of different guys out or just a lot of different lineups, right? Which kind of speaks to, the resilience of the team. So now you kind of hope that you get healthy. Now you got some upgrades, and now you have a team that, maybe they can really make some noise this year, compared to obviously last year, because last year was so disastrous for them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you were saying, the depth is really what's could push this team really over the edge, and I think that could potentially help them climb the standings for sure. And it's like, like you were saying, Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, they were both on pretty bad teams prior to. And now that they're on a very good team, you're kind of seeing flashes where it's like, okay, their games can be really, really valuable, and even more valuable on a team like this. Because, like take Daniel Gafford, for example. I mean, he's coming from, Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole pretty much throwing him lobs. But now you've got, Luka Doncic being your primary playmaker, and that's a huge upgrade. So I think we're going to see him be a lot more efficient. And another thing about Gafford is on the Wizards, he got into a lot of foul trouble because, it's hard when you're undersized big to kind of bang with the big boys, if you get what I'm saying. So him being undersized big, but also coming off the bench, I think he's a better backup center than he is a
Yeah.
starting center. So that will probably help him calm down. And, you can bring him in for extended periods of time where, he's not going to be in as much foul trouble because he's getting less minutes. But the minutes that he's going to get are probably going to be a little bit more impactful than I would say his Wizards minutes. And then with a guy like PJ Washington, like you said, shooting's down, but it is intriguing to see him potentially take a leap in his game where, if your shot's not falling, you got to create something because, you are coming off the bench and they're relying on him because, in 24 minutes, he did go 6 for 10 with 14 points. So you got to feel good about that. And it was very efficient except for the three. He went 1 for 4. But regardless, I think these additions are great. I think they'll work out
Yep.
for them, especially, with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. It helps to relieve some pressure because you do need some playmakers. You do need some guys that will make plays when those guys aren't in. But at the same time, say Lively comes back, and maybe he gets into foul trouble. You bring Gafford in; it's pretty much the same player, just a little bit different, I guess. Points of attack,
Yeah.
I guess.
He's,
In
he's
size.
a little he's stronger. He's a lot more
Sure,
physical, I think, than Lively. Lively is more like a pure athlete.
exactly. So you get similar things out of both guys, but regardless, you do have to feel good, and the depth is definitely going to carry this team, hopefully, to the
Yeah.
playoffs.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like say JaVale McGee versus like Dwight
Sure.
Howard, say of like the Lakers title team. I'm not saying that they're those guys, but like I'm just saying like different looks, right?
Yeah,
Because like
it's a deep
JaVale
center
was more like
rotation.
because JaVale was more like the athletic, you know, lob threat big, whereas Dwight could do that stuff, but he was also could bang and be more
Exactly.
physical, in comparison to JaVale. So it just like we said, it gives them different looks. Um, which is a good thing if you're Dallas, right? And again, the fact that you got those guys and you didn't have to give up like significant parts of your rotation, right? It was like Grant Williams who had fallen out of favor, clearly on his way out of Dallas, right? Where
Yeah.
it looked like a good signing and then it just didn't work out. And then say Seth Curry, right, who wasn't really playing aside from like when their guard, when their guard rotation was kind of shorthanded.
Yeah.
So the fact that you got two, not one but two rotational upgrades without giving up significant parts of your roster. Now you just got to get healthy and kind of see where you go from there, right? And then Oklahoma City's perspective, obviously Hayward, hasn't played and he's not supposed to play until after the All-Star break, so we won't necessarily be able to have many takeaways, from that. They did sign a guy, and we'll get into the buyout guys, a little bit later. But just in general, right? Like, not really anything to take away from Oklahoma City in this game because their new guys haven't played yet.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that, again, Dallas' size may make them more of an issue against a team like Oklahoma City now that they have some legitimate big guys to, put out there.
Yeah, before we move
Um,
on, it was kind of funny. Like I think the day after Grant Williams got moved, it happened, prior to him being moved. But there was a quote where it was like, with a guy like Luka Doncic, you kind of just have to sit back and really do nothing and just eat popcorn while you watch him work. And it's just funny that he said that while he was on his way out. But it is kind of true. But at the same time, if you're good enough, I feel like, he's going to get you the ball in the right situations. Is that what you kind of see with, Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington? So, maybe that was kind of like writing on the wall, but, who knows?
Right. That's kind of the interesting thing about playing, next to a guy like a Luka because the offense is really centered and structured completely around him.
Yeah.
So, for some guys, right, it's not that difficult of a fit because it's like if you're not a creator and you're more of a finisher type guy anyways, then you're just kind of you just got, your job is a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure.
But then for some other guys, right, you have to really make some real adjustments to your game. In order to make that type of stuff fit, right? Like we've seen that with other guys before, right? Say like a Harden or even like a LeBron, right? Like, you have to kind of change the way you play for some guys. And for some guys that may be a little difficult, right? Like I could see like Luka maybe being a tough guy for some guys to play with because he is, a guy that plays with the ball in his hands a lot.
Like look
And
at
if you're
Porzingis. Look at what happened with him and Porzingis.
right, and some guys it just doesn't work like that, right? So it's like, and then for others, right? Like, Kyrie I think has adjusted relatively well, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know, they haven't played a ton of games together mainly because they've been hurt, right? But like, you can see like at least offensively because Kyrie can play without the ball, he's done it before next to other guys like a LeBron, right? The offensive fit, works relatively well. It's just again because neither guy is a strong defender. I think Luka's improved defensively, but you still wouldn't necessarily call him like a strong defender.
Right.
That's where it's, you have to kind of find other ways to, put some other high, motor guys around them. And, Gafford's a guy with a high motor, right? Washington seems like he might be a high motor guy, right? Derek Jones Jr., right? So the fact that they have all these other athletes that can run the floor, that they can kind of just throw outlet passes to, or just guys that will just crash and play hard, that helps them too, right? Because
Yeah.
like those guys, are a little bit more sometimes like, Kyrie's like kind of a cruise control guy, right? Where like, over the course of a game, he could have, he could be relatively quiet, and then all of a sudden he has like a 15-point stretch.
Hmm.
Same with a Luka, right? Where like he could go like a stretch where he's kind of just facilitating, and then like he can go through another stretch where he's, scoring like 15, 20 straight points.
Yes, sir.
So, so those are the type of guys that they acquired that I think make a lot of sense in terms of fitting around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then with New York, right? Obviously, it's with New York, right? Their guys did play Bogdanovich and Alec Burks. They did play. They played relatively fine. I mean, Bogdanovich was 3 for 10, 2 of 6 for three, so not great.
Right.
Alec Burks had 22. Obviously, the issue with the Knicks right now is they're a little shorthanded, right? Because obviously Julius Randle's out and Anunoby's been out, so that's kind of a tough position to put in, right? Jalen Brunson just came back from his ankle injury. He had 40. So that's kind of the difficult spot is that, it's like those guys are going to be coming off the bench, right? And I think those guys will fit well into their role. It's just a matter of for the Knicks, kind of like Dallas, like, you got to get healthy, right? That's the thing. Like, with Julius Randle and Anunoby being out, that puts a lot more pressure on some of these other guys to play more significant roles than they probably would be, right? Like Taj Gibson, is having to start and play, 20 minutes,
Yeah.
and again, he had 0 points, 0 for 4. It's not his fault, right? If the Knicks were healthy, he probably either wouldn't be playing at all, or he'd
Yeah.
probably be playing like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. But instead, you're kind of in a tough spot where you're having to play like a completely different type of lineup, right? Like they're starting, Achua, and Gibson together, and Achua's actually played pretty well, since like he kind of struggled a little early, but now he's fit in, right? He's not taking a ton of jump shots, so he's kind of fitting in as a hustle big, playing to his strengths, which is good to see. But again, it's kind of tough, I think, to judge some of the Knicks stuff until at least one of Randall or Anunoby comes back. And I know Anunoby, I think, is going to be out for at least 3 weeks, and then Randall probably still has another couple weeks to go, if I'm not mistaken, depending on how he heals up from his dislocated shoulder. So, that's the thing about the Knicks is like, because they were on a roll, then the injuries just kind of just came up out of nowhere, right? Randall goes down, then Anunoby goes down. So now you're down two of your three best players, which is pretty tough. After Mitchell Robinson already was down, and I think Hartenstein was out in this game, right?
Yes.
Which is why Todd Gibson was playing, and he's been playing really well, fitting in for Mitchell Robinson while he's been out, right? Like, Hartenstein is a guy that could potentially, price himself out, if when he's a free agent because he's, played very well.
Yeah, and I think that's why we really like this move because you did get two guys that will help your depth as well, and relieve some pressure. It's just a matter of being healthy, like you were saying. And if this team was healthy, I think they probably would have blown Indiana out of the water, in my opinion. But regardless, when you have Taj Gibson out there, it is tough. When you do have Dante DiVincenzo kind of shooting, but that's kind of his game where he's more of a gunslinger, chucker. But when it's on, it's on. But regardless, you do want to see Alec Burks and Bogdanovich thrive in this system, and I think they will. It's just hard to judge this so early because of the health concerns. So it's like I'm not really gonna say too much about them because they're not healthy, and I would like to see them in the healthy system. But regardless, I think it's a good move, and I don't think this needs to like raise any red flags for anyone. I think as time goes on, I think we'll like this move even more.
Right. And then, for the Pacers, McDermott, he played 7 minutes, so
Yeah.
he didn't really play a whole lot. Obviously their big move, right, was the Siakam trade that happened earlier, and he's played very well, for the Pacers, right? You look at the stats there, I guess numbers wise, kind of similar, right? He averaged 22, 6 and 5 in Toronto. Now he's averaging 21 and a half, 7 and 5 in Indiana, but he's way more efficient. The three is up to 42.5% on 3 attempts a game, and then he's shooting 57% from the field, which makes sense, right? Because like now he's in a spot where he's not your best player anymore. And now and Halliburton had a stretch where he was hurt. Now he's healthy. So that's where you should probably start to see a better version of Indiana, right? They got destroyed by Golden State, the other night before the Knicks. But that was a game where, like, again, Halliburton had a pretty rough game, for most of it. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where if you're Indiana, now you're at a point where, again, now your rotation starts to make a lot more sense, right? Heald's gone. So that should open up more minutes for Matherin, who's, you know, kind of hit or miss, honestly, because he's a young guy. But now the rotation is a little more solidified. So now, we should see a little bit more consistency from them, I would think, as well.
yeah, for sure. And like you were saying, I think the main thing that we should probably be looking at is the Siakam stuff. And there's a wild play last night or
Yeah.
Saturday night. So Tyrese Halliburton, he kind of just threw it off the backboard pretty much from the 3-point line, caught it himself,
Yep.
kicked out to Siakam for a wide open three. Imagine the pressure on Siakam to hit that three, because if he doesn't
Yeah.
hit it, I mean, that's pretty much a dud of a play. But
Right.
regardless, the playmaking is there for sure for Indiana. And I think, him Siakam being paired with Halliburton is kind of one of the more underrated, duos, I think, for sure, because Siakam can get to his spots, like we said, shaky from the three sometimes, but inside, mid range, the paint, you love to see it, and I think that's the perfect pairing, and I think it'll work out in the long run. I think it's just a matter of playoff time. I'm not sure how it's going to translate, but nonetheless, I think Indiana's been pretty good in their recent stretch, even without Halliburton. So you do have to feel good right now about them.
Right, and somebody, on social media, they were
Mhm.
actually able to like find like a play where like they said 12 years to the day, right? Like Kobe also did that like
Yeah,
on the same court against the Knicks.
it's
I think
crazy.
the pass was for like a mid-range,
Yeah, the Pow.
jumper with yeah, Pow,
Yeah,
right? Which is kind of funny because that, kind of is more indicative of where the game was at that point
sure.
compared to now, which is pretty
Absolutely.
funny. But, just kind of a wild play. But like you said, shout out Halliburton,
Yeah,
for a play like that. That's pretty ridiculous.
exactly.
But again, like he's a great passer. So I mean, just it's kind of funny, right? Because like now people are saying it's like the evolution of the jump pass, where like people will kind of throw the passes in midair, but now people might start throwing passes off the backboard to people
True,
in
true.
midair.
That's true. And it's
Yeah.
like I think we've seen a lot of backboard plays, recently, starting
Yeah.
with Anthony Edwards. It's not like he's the first guy to
Right.
do it, but that was
Self,
kind of like the
self,
catalyst. And then I think
yeah, the
even
self lob.
Embiid did it, I think, this
Yep.
season. So we've seen it a few
Yeah.
times. But at first, when I first saw the play, I was like, no way Halliburton's going to go up with that. And then,
Yeah.
nonetheless, he passed it to the wide
Yeah.
open guy. So
I thought he was getting ready to do a self lob. I
me
didn't
too.
think he was going to do like a pass in midair
Yeah,
off of
exactly.
that. Yeah, and then moving on to Milwaukee, right? Obviously, Patrick Beverly, right? That was their, new acquisition. And he played, he played relatively fine. The crowd liked what he did, and again, I think he's probably a guy that when he plays really well, he'll probably be, like a fan favorite because he will compete, on the defensive end. He's a veteran and, he can knock down some shots. Obviously, his game isn't really predicated on scoring. I mean, they destroyed, what's left of the Charlotte Hornets at this point, who are a very awful team who also, have some key guys out. But either way, I think it makes sense, for the Bucks, just in the fact of again, you needed some type of defensive guard. And again, even though he's not quite what he once was, it's still probably better than what you had before with Cameron Payne. So that's kind of something to factor in. When you look at a trade like that, right? Because it's not just about what does this guy bring from one standpoint. It's about the totality of the package.
Sure, yeah, and it's interesting. I think Pat Bev, he fits into that Doc Rivers system. We've seen him; he knows the system, so I think that's a plus side to it. A negative potentially, chemistry wise. I'm not going to harp on it too much, but it is kind of interesting. If you guys remember, Patrick Beverly and Damian Lillard have some beef. I'm sure it's been squashed, obviously, but
Yeah, like
there was a
Patrick
time.
Beverly and Russ.
Yeah, exactly. So, it happens. But that's kind of what you get when you have a, I guess, quote unquote, enforcer, on your team like Pat Bev. But it was funny. I did see, pictures of him in the huddle drawing up plays. So, that is kind of the guy that he is. He's a great teammate from what we've heard. And obviously, because we don't play in the NBA, but from what we've heard and seen, Pat Bev is a great teammate. He brings that energy. And I think that's something the Bucks were lacking. And I think, it does show, I guess, against Charlotte. Charlotte's a bad team, but regardless, they did blow him out of the water. But he did some stuff, and I think it does help because, he is a solid defender, like you said, just a little bit small, but, he does attack and, make people uncomfortable, and I think that's his job, and I think he's doing it very well so far.
Right, yeah. Next up, from Philly's perspective, right, Buddy Hield they traded for. He's been starting, while Embiid's been out. I mean, not that that would really make a difference, and I think Melton's been out for a while with the back issue, so I'm curious to see, who gets the starting nod between those two guys. And in his two games, right, again, a very small sample size in 38 minutes, 21 and a half, 6 assists, 4.5 rebounds, 38 from three, 46 from the field. Again, fills a need as a guy that can shoot the ball. An upgrade over the guys that they moved him for, right? Obviously, they were the ones that traded Patrick Beverly for Cameron away for Cameron Payne, right? And he played pretty well for them. In that second game, again, they signed another buyout guy, and we'll get into that, relatively soon. But just regardless, again with Hield, again, it's kind of hard to have like 100% great takeaways while Embiid's out, especially because we don't know when he's coming back. But at the very least, again, it's a rotational upgrade over what they had before, right? So it's a guy that can be a reliable shooter. It's just going to be interesting because this is pretty much going to be right his first real playoff test, right? Because Philly, even with Embiid being out for a while, they've built up kind of enough wins, right, where they're not going to fall out of the playoffs, right?
Right.
They probably won't fall any lower than like 5 or 6. So, he's going to be in the playoffs, right? And he's a guy that shot very well. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like. But either way, if Embiid comes back at some point, he should be able to feast, right? Off of the open looks that he's going to get, from Embiid and Maxey drawing attention. In addition to, a guy like a Tobias Harris, right? Who, sometimes you're going to need, a guy to put on him defensively, or even a guy like a Oubre who's tailed off since his early play in the season, but still could be a guy who could give you rotational minutes, and others that are on Philly.
Yeah, the problem that I have with Philly right now is obviously, and this is blatantly obvious. They're what 5-13, I think, without Embiid. So we
Yeah,
already know without Embiid, this team is pretty mediocre at best or below average, I guess you could
bad,
call them. Yeah, bad,
bad.
bad. Yeah, I was trying to be nice, but regardless. I guess, and with Embiid, obviously, we know that they're a championship contender, clearly. So the problem that I have is just Embiid being out. But, if we do look at the additions, you feel really good about Buddy Hield. We already know he's a knockdown shooter. He's above 40%. You love to see it. And, he can get to his spots. And I think he'll flourish, when Embiid does come back because it'll free up open shots, like you were saying. And then Cam Payne coming off the bench. That's a little bit more intriguing because it's a very different point guard from, Pat Bev. But
Mhm.
I think he does bring some value in terms of being another locker room guy. People seem to really enjoy having him around, but when it comes to his game, very streaky, he can shoot you out of games at times. But I think if he's coming off the bench, you feel better about him versus him being a starter. So no complaints about that. And like I said, yeah, Buddy Hield, I think it's a great acquisition, and you have to feel really good about it.
Yeah, and then next up, right, Royce O'Neal, right? So he made his debut, the other night, against Golden State, right? Kind of a wild game, right, where it
Yeah.
was, back and forth. Looked like Golden State might pull away early. Phoenix came back. Looked like Phoenix might pull it out at the end, and then Steph hits a game winner off of a pretty bad decision by Bradley Beal, I think, to gamble,
Mm-hmm.
on a steal, on a guy like Steph. Just I don't think that was a great decision.
Agreed.
Um, yeah. Also, kind of a funny back and forth between Nurkic and Draymond Green. Pretty hilarious, I
Yeah.
think, in my opinion. But regardless, Royce O'Neal, he played only 11 minutes. I think Frank Vogel going into the game said that he was probably going to play in spurts, which was kind of interesting, right? I kind of would have initially just assumed that he probably would have just played like as much as they probably could. I mean, he's not a scorer, right? He's like a 3-and-D wing, right? He had 4 rebounds, 3 points. Missed a layup, I think, right at the rim, but he wasn't the only one. There were other guys.
Yeah.
1 of 2 from 3. So, he was a +4 when he was out there, right? Obviously, so that that kind of suggests that I think rotationally it makes sense. And again, like he's better than any of the guys that they sent out, right? Roddy didn't play, and I don't really expect him to really be a real part of the
No.
rotation. I think that was just another guy just to have there, break glass in case of emergency,
Sure.
or whatever. But, that's the thing with Phoenix where it's like, they have played, much better as of late. In the fourth quarters, those games are pretty nasty. I mean, in fairness, like, a lot of the games that they've been in as of late, because they've been over basically after 3, they haven't had to really play, any real dangerous fourth quarter minutes. It just kind of feels like when the game gets close, you just don't necessarily know how to feel, where it feels like because of the scores that they have, they should be really good in the fourth quarters,
Yeah,
but it's a lot of one-on-one. It's a lot of, kind of relying on tough shots. And it worked, right? Because Booker was able to kind of, basically single-handedly, get him back into the game, right? And then Beal hit a go-ahead shot. But then, right at the end of the game, right, Golden State was able to get a defensive stop where they forced Beal into taking a tough step-back shot. It didn't go in, and then it cost them on the defensive end. And it's kind of rough that I think you didn't necessarily find a way to get like another real backup big man because I just don't feel like Drew Eubanks has been like really all that effective this year. I know he wasn't really like bad against the Warriors tonight, right? He played 16 minutes, 4 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks. Um, but he's got a negative plus minus on the season for a team that's 9 games above 500. So that's not necessarily a great thing. I know they've put Bol out there at times. I just don't necessarily know if I trust that he's really going to really make a real impact, in the playoffs. And that's kind of the tough part there, right? Like you got your 3-and-D wing, which is fine. I still feel like you have a couple of holes. You weren't going to be able to address all of them. It just would have been nice, I think, if they could have picked up maybe some other small ball stretch five. Because, like the issue with a guy like a Nurkic is that he's not always going to be able to punish teams for going small because he's kind of like a so-so subpar finisher around the rim despite his size. So, if you're going to play big and close games with him, he needs to be, kind of better taking advantage. You know what I mean? And it's
sure.
like, that's kind of the issue there. But the Royce O'Neal move makes sense, right? It's just a matter of, I think, he'll probably need to play more. So hopefully, and, hopefully that means you're going to bump some of these other guys' minutes down, right? Like, say, like an Eric Gordon, who just hasn't played as well as of late like he did earlier in the season.
Hmm.
So that's going to be a challenge, I think, for Frank Vogel to kind of figure out which guys to play, given the fact that some of the guys you just have some limited options after that starting five.
Yeah, sure. I agree wholeheartedly. And it's like you're saying with Royce O'Neal, it's kind of hard to judge what, he's capable of on this team because he pretty much barely played. He only played 11 minutes. So that's kind of hard to judge. But I'm more concerned about the Suns and, why they didn't go for a backup point guard, I guess, or maybe even like I guess, starting point guard even at times because it seems like, you need somebody to be there to calm this offense down sometimes because it does seem a little sporadic where, you have three guys that pretty much can do the same thing. They're all very good at, two dribbles and then pull up shot. They can elevate and do that, but you don't really have an elite playmaker here. It's like Booker is there, I guess, and I don't consider him
Yeah,
an elite playmaker. I consider him a very good playmaker, but not on that elite point guard level for sure because I think he's more of a two. But regardless, that's the thing that concerns me with them. I would have liked to have seen them go for a point guard or, like you were saying, a backup big because there are times when Bol does enter the game, he gets a lot of cheers. We already know he's a fan favorite, but how reliable is he on defense? Yeah, he can make defensive highlights, but in terms of impacting the game, he's probably going to get scored on a lot. And that's, that just comes with a guy with his frame and his size and things like that. But I'm not really sure how I feel about Phoenix. I think they've been very good,
yeah,
but there are a lot of question marks with them. I think they're one of the teams that has a lot of question marks because come playoff time, are they going to run out of gas? Are they going to make boneheaded plays? Who knows? Because it seems like a lot of those guys do make mistakes. Like Beal, KD makes mistakes. KD I think had 6 turnovers. So that's what I mean when the offense doesn't seem very calm because when you're asking guys to play make and playmaking isn't their number one thing, things can get a little murky. So that's why I would have liked to have seen them go for a point guard. But, it is what it is. But this game was very controversial. It was very funny, I think. And
yeah,
the problem is, like, I've seen a lot of people, like, jawing back and forth on Twitter, Instagram, whatever. But I mean, I feel like you can't really take away the fact that Phoenix has already beat Golden State, a decent chunk of games this season. I think this is what Golden State's maybe first win against Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, we already know who's the better team, but Phoenix should have came away with this game. I think it just way too many mistakes all around from pretty much everybody who did play.
Yeah, I do think it was interesting how it didn't really feel like Phoenix played well, and they still, kind of were on the way to winning before Steph hit the heroic three,
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting, because it felt like for most of the game, the Golden State was playing a lot better, right? They were playing harder. It felt like they were going to win the game,
sure.
and even still, right, they almost found a way to lose. just because they couldn't stop Booker,
Yeah.
pretty much to close out the game. And that's kind of interesting with the Warriors, right? Where you can kind of see why they stood pat at the deadline, where in the sense of like they've played much better as of late. Jonathan Kaminga, right, obviously has been a big part of that. I know he had like a negative plus minus, and that was more so because in the second half he didn't do quite as much.
Yeah.
But either way, right, Steph Curry was really good. Draymond has been great since he's come back. They've been playing him at center, and it's been paying dividends because it's made them a lot more, mobile, a lot more quicker to react, right? Kaminga gives them a paint presence that they didn't really have much at all last year. Now it's a matter of, Clay, can he find a way maybe to get it going? Because he was not very good last night, and he,
Nope.
sat at the, he pretty much didn't close the game other than I think that final possession. So now it kind of feels like their rotation is starting to get a little more under control, right? Gary Payton came back
Hmm.
and he made a big difference with his athleticism and his hustle. Which again is kind of a big part of why they were so excited to get him back last year. Now you're waiting for Chris Paul to come back. And there's a chance for them to win a lot of games down the stretch because they, if you look at their strength of schedule, they have one of the easiest remaining strengths of schedules in the Western Conference. So there's a path for them, if they win like 70% of their remaining games to be able to, maybe kind of climb back up, to that 7-8 spot as opposed to the 10 spot that they're in right now. Because I feel like Utah is probably going to fall off. They may try to compete, but I think, they didn't really make any moves that make you feel like that they improved. And then Houston's pretty much just fallen off a cliff. Some of that's been, because Van Vliet's been hurt. So I feel like they're probably kind of toast. So I think we're probably getting a better sense of like who the 10 teams in the West are now. It's just a matter for Golden State. Can you continue to keep up the momentum and, continue to play better? Because again, like, are they going to win the championship? Probably not. But they're playing at a level now where I think because they had a really difficult schedule and now it tails off, where they could probably be one of those teams that goes on a late run and then maybe becomes like a spoiler for a first round matchup, right? Like let's say if it's not the Nuggets or the Clippers that's the 1 seed or the 2 seed, but it's like Minnesota or Oklahoma City, right? Like that's a scenario where like if you're Oklahoma City, you may feel pretty good about being able to upset one of those teams. It's
Sure.
just a matter of the 1 seed is still up for grabs at this point. So, if it's, Denver or the Clippers that steals the 1 or 2 seed, whoever the playing teams are probably wouldn't feel great about that. But again, you all you can control is your own team. So you got to win the games you can win. And getting a win over Phoenix, right, which is one of the handful of like good teams that they have to play the rest of the way. That's a good
It's
that's a
huge.
good way to kick things off after they've already played much better as of late.
Yeah, it's huge. And like you were saying, the 10 teams are pretty much set. I think it's just a matter of what's the order going to be. This isn't going to be the final order, I don't think. But there's potential for teams to fall. There's definitely potential for teams to rise, but regardless, I think you do have to feel better, I think, as a Warriors fan, because it's like you were saying, if you look at the teams below you, you don't really feel like Utah's probably going to catch up to you. You don't really feel like Houston's going to catch up. Memphis, Portland, they're done. San Antonio done.
Yeah.
But like, the teams above you, you have a chance to kind of overtake the Lakers. Maybe I don't think they can. I don't think the Warriors can get much higher than like maybe 8 or 7. But I would say they have a chance to get to 9.
Yeah, I mean, because again they have one of the easiest remaining schedules. So as long as they can win, like I said, probably at least 2/3 of their remaining games, they're gonna have a chance, to be in that, like you said, favorable mix.
Yeah,
Again, I think ideally your goal would be to get to 7-8. It's just that's gonna be tough because the 7-8 teams also, I think are good. Like say Dallas, I think is in that 7-8
yeah.
spot, and they got better.
Dallas is
And I
8.
don't think their schedule is like ridiculously tough. I think it's more so like middle of the pack because I know they started the year off with a pretty easy schedule.
Right.
But again, but also for Dallas, they weren't healthy for long stretches. So if they get healthy, they may be able to kind of pick up one of those final spots. So like you said, I think that's kind of at a point where like this isn't probably going to be the final order, but I think now 50 plus games in, we're at a point where we can kind of see who the final 10 teams are. And that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because some of the teams that are in the 10 were teams that you may not have expected to be in there.
Sure.
And then say like a team like a Memphis, you probably would have expected them to be one of the 10 teams because you would have assumed, Ja comes back eventually and they can win enough games. But once he went down, right, that pretty much ended that. So,
Yeah.
Even a team like Houston, interestingly enough, right? That was a team where early on it looked like they were going to be, in the top 10, mix, and now it feels like they're probably out of it.
Hmm.
Um, at this point, they didn't really make any significant moves anyway. So,
Yeah.
because again, there were other teams that made moves, right? Like Brooklyn, they acquired Schroeder, and he's their backup point guard. Ben Simmons is starting now, right? Toronto, they acquired Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji, right? They're playing, roles off the bench, right? Simone Fontecchio, he's playing for Detroit, he's playing fine. And they've got more minutes, now to the young guys. I think they've won two of their last three, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool to see. Um, including one over the Kings, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
So that's kind of funny with Detroit, right? I think they've won like 4 of their last 9 or 10 games, which doesn't sound
Yeah.
great.
They're
But
four
then
and
you look
six in
at
their
the
last
fact,
10.
yeah, they're 4-6 in their last 10. But then you look at the fact that they've won 8 games all year, so half their games they've won in the last couple of weeks. So
Right.
that's demonstrably better than what it was early on. So now we're gonna get into the buyout guys. Those guys haven't necessarily played yet, but a lot of them, now we're kind of starting to hear like, oh, this guy's been bought out. This guy has signed. So there are still some guys on the market. So I guess we'll initially just get into the guys that have just gotten signed.
Sure.
So right now, I believe there are 3 players that got signed, from the buyout market or waivers or whatever. Kyle Lowry, Spencer Dinwiddie, Bismack Biyombo. Biyombo, I think, was just a free agent,
Yeah.
right? Like Memphis waived him, like a month or so ago. So which one do you want to kind of get into first?
Let's start with the Lakers, because I'm
All right,
very
so
curious to see what your thoughts are about, Spencer
okay,
Dinwiddie.
so we'll get into Spencer Dinwiddie, right? So obviously that was kind of the shocker surprise one, right? Where he was traded to Toronto at the deadline. I know his name was in trade rumors. I think it was more so like with the Lakers as like a potential, like, oh, if D'Angelo Russell gets traded, Spencer Dinwiddie could get moved, like I think to like Atlanta or whatever. Or if the Atlanta trade falls through, maybe you just trade for him, which I wouldn't have done.
Right.
But anyways, so he got waived by Toronto, which was kind of surprising, I think. Our reaction was pretty wild in the live stream when he got cut
Yeah.
because we didn't really expect that at all. So he ended up basically being a buyout guy. And reportedly, it was basically down to LA and Dallas. He went to both of those teams as games, right? He went to New York to watch the Mavs play with Mark Cuban. Then he went to the Lakers game to watch them play against New Orleans, sat next to Rob Pelinka. And it kind of felt like it was leaning toward. A lot of people thought he was going to go to Dallas.
I did.
I think there was like reports that like the Lakers felt confident that they could get Dinwiddie, but a lot of other people around the league thought it was going to be Dallas. I thought, as a Laker fan, he was probably going to sign with Dallas just because he had played there before. And I think somebody had said that. I think it was Eric Pincus who said that Dallas technically has a little more money that they can give him versus LA. But then the thought that sealed the deal was like he was in the locker room with LA, right? And he was talking, I think, to D'Angelo Russell. And then like D'Angelo Russell in his post game presser was like, yeah, you guys will know about him soon enough. So they signed him right to a $1.75 million contract, which is a little higher, I think, than other teams because they didn't use all of their mid-level exception on
Hmm.
Gabe Vincent. So his role is going to be a backup point guard. Obviously, he's not going to start. I think the main question, obviously, would mainly be what version of him are you getting? Is it the version, similar to what he was looking like, in Dallas, the last couple of seasons, or is it the version from, earlier this season where he's been pretty bad? From what I've read, a lot of the reports talking about the Nets, they feel like it was more so that he was like not quiet quitting, but loudly quitting on the team, right? Where it's not like that he actually was just bad and just washed, but that he just was not very high on the coaching staff. I guess didn't really like the situation he was in and was just kind of just not really playing well, right? Like it, like kind of like throwing games basically in a way, right? Like I think somebody even reported it as like he was like going on strike or whatever, which is kind of interesting.
That's
But
one way to put it.
yeah, so my guess is that again, it's like what we kind of talked about with say like the Dallas acquisitions, where if you're playing next to more talented guys in a more, in a role that's better suited for you and that's more defined, you're gonna be better, right? Like he's not gonna be a starting point guard. He's not gonna play, like 35 minutes a game or whatever. He's gonna come off the bench, right? And he's gonna play, across with some of these other guys and some of these second units. It should help a guy like an Austin Reeves because then that kind of puts him in a role like last year where he's not necessarily asked to just go one on one and create as much. That puts him in more of a role where, hey, your offense is going to be, not quite as, like taxing. So that should kind of help you get back to being like, more of like an all around type guy like he was last year, right? That was the version that we all liked. Where he was, making plays in the pick and roll sometimes, but also like, spotting up or, making the secondary passes or playing defense, taking charges, which he hasn't done as much this year. And part of that's because they haven't had a backup point guard at all, right? Like Gabe Vincent's been hurt, um, only played in 5 games. So I think that's also kind of like he's going to be the Gabe Vincent insurance in case he either doesn't come back or if by the time he comes back, he's just not 100%. And we don't know when he's going to be back. He could be back, in March. He may not come back at all. We don't know. So I don't really have a problem with it, right? Like obviously they didn't make any trades at the deadline, so that's kind of where you're disappointed. But at the very least, you were able to make an acquisition where you got probably the best guy on the buyout market. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take for him to kind of figure out his role and fit in, because he's a different guard, compared to D'Lo and Reeves, right? Where like even though he's a scoring guard similar to those two guys, he does it a little bit more by being a little bit more comfortable attacking the basket. Whereas those guys, I think, are more better suited for perimeter play, particularly like D'Angelo Russell, right? Like it's not like D'Angelo Russell can't drive to the basket and make layups.
Right.
He's just doesn't do it quite as consistently. Whereas Dinwiddie can attack the basket more, and I think that's where it kind of diversifies your offense. And while all of your defensive guys are out, you're gonna have to figure out more on the offensive end because you're probably not going to be able to play consistent high level defense anyways, considering so many of their non AD impactful defenders are out, right? Because now it's a very different starting five, right? Where you're starting Rui, with LeBron, AD, D'Lo, and Austin. So now you're kind of hoping, I think, for more of an offensive boost, and I think Dinwiddie can do that. Again, it's just a matter of can he still find ways to knock down jump shots as well? Because he's not going to be able to just have the ball in his hands all the time. So I think he'll be better than he was in Brooklyn. It's just a matter of again, finding the balance between, like there's going to be some nights where you're not going to be as much of a factor because you're on a minimum contract. But he should help boost their offense, I think.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a great addition, especially for the second unit. It gives you some calm stabilization factors, I guess. And I think he's one of those guys where I don't want to say he's not like super athletic, you know what I mean? But
Right.
he's
Yeah.
more
No.
athletic than I feel like D'Angelo Russell, so that should be kind of
Yeah.
interesting to see how he does fit into the bench and whatnot. But and he can knock down some outside shots at times, but I think it'll be good to see him kind of play make and command that second unit because I think he has potential, and I think if he's in a situation where he wants to be, on a team, and I think anytime that you have LeBron James, you're pretty much in contention. So I'm not, going to say that the Lakers aren't a contender. I think they are a contender still. So now that he's on a better situation, I think we'll probably see his play be elevated, and then maybe we get to see some minutes with him and Christian Wood. I'm just very intrigued to see what kind
Right.
of combos are going to be there because I think there is a lot of upside, and I think he's obviously better than Jalen Hood-Schifino. So, and with Gabe Vincent out, there's potential for this to actually work out extremely well in the Lakers' favor.
Right.
But that's just being super duper optimistic. But I like the move a lot because I think if you look at the options, I think he's better than Kyle Lowry, and you address the need that you did kind of need was like a guy who can calm down the offense a little bit and attack,
Yeah.
and just score, get some offense going. Because at times, the Lakers' offense has looked so mind-boggling sometimes, but
Yeah.
regardless, I think he does help them a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I
and
think.
and I was gonna say, uh, I think you put it beautifully, where Reeves is a guy like we know that Reeves is good, but he's not a guy that should probably be taking people off the dribble. I think he's better, where he doesn't have to think as much. He doesn't have to be put in high pressure situations. It's more so you can get him the ball and set him up for success. And I think potentially Spencer Dinwiddie can do that for you guys.
Yeah, because that's the thing is that again, like you said, he's not a super athletic guard. It's just he's much more comfortable being able to attack the basket, right? Like he's kind of like a shifty-ish type ball handler where he can kind of create off the dribble and kind of catch you off guard and then be able to drive, right? It's
Right.
not like it's not like a Lonnie Walker or Malik Monk type guard like they had before where he's gonna catch lobs and like run the floor in
Right. Right.
transition. But it does make your offense a little bit more dynamic because, only really LeBron is like a guy that can kind of consistently like put the ball on the floor and go downhill. And he's not going to do that every single night because he's almost 40,
Right.
right? AD can sometimes do it, but because he's not bringing up the ball initiating offense, it's a little bit different,
Yeah.
right? And like I said, same with like D'Lo and Reeves, they can do that. D'Lo doesn't do it quite as consistently because he's more comfortable, obviously, operating on the perimeter. Um, and then Dinwiddie is the most athletic of the three, even though he's not, like you said, a crazy athlete. So that's where I think, again, it's better than what it was before because you got a guy who is a good player for basically nothing, right? It's not like you gave up, a significant rotational piece, to get somebody who may not be like that much better than what you already have. Again, does it still like make you? Does it still like, do you still not feel great about not making any trades? No, but at the same time, again, you know, that's kind of the funny thing about the buyout market is that sometimes there are guys that will just kind of show up,
They actually
out
did
of
something.
nowhere that are better than you think. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes it can. So that's where like, and again, they have played much better as of late. I think they've won 4 of their last 5, 9 of their last 14, right? So since like that horrible stretch in December, it's been a lot better. And it's not like they're only winning against like scrub teams. So that's the other part that makes you feel better. And it's been more so because their offense has been a lot better as of late. So that's the part where like, again, kind of like Golden State, maybe you can go on a late run. And if you can get a favorable first round matchup, you might feel like, okay, we might be able to, not just go out in the first round, right? Because again, like if they play a team like Oklahoma City or a Minnesota, you're not as scared of a matchup like that as you would be against like the Nuggets or the Clippers or something like
Sure.
that. So that's where I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see how it works going forward. And can some of these guys come back and please get healthy? Because that's kind of the other rough part where it's like, like a Vanderbilt was a starter for them last year. Um, and I think he would have started had he not gotten hurt. But now, he plays some of his best basketball as a Laker and then gets hurt, and now he's out. We don't know when he's coming back. Gabe Vincent, we haven't seen play basically at all. I think one of the last games he played was when I went to LA to see him play, and
Right.
that was in October.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago. So, we'll see. But I think there has been a lot better play as of late. And I think it also helps that now that the trade deadline is over, some of these guys will probably feel a little bit more comfortable about, okay, I'm not getting traded, until maybe the offseason or, something else like that. And now like you can kind of see like which guys should probably be rotationally playing.
Sure.
Because with some of the other guys out, it's forced them to make some other decisions about the rotation, kind of like with Golden State.
Yeah.
And then another buyout guy, Kyle Lowry, right? Obviously, he was bought out by Charlotte, didn't play for them at all, which we knew, right? Probably didn't even reporters show up to Charlotte,
Yeah.
if I had to guess. So he got bought out, and pretty much it was kind of what we expected. He went to Philadelphia, which again, I think that's what we kind of talked about on the live stream, where once Beverly got traded, right, we were like, oh, that's probably because they're going to get a buyout guy, and it's probably going to be Lowry. Again, he's from Philadelphia, played for Villanova. He did like a video after he signed there, right? Like with the "I'm coming home" music,
Yeah.
which we heard, with the LeBron thing a while back, which was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he's at a different point in his career, right? He's much older, not the same guy anymore. He played, I guess, okay, for Miami, right? But I
I don't.
think the
I
main
wouldn't
issue,
even say that, dude. That's just
I
being
mean,
nice.
the main thing is that he's not a starting point guard
Yeah.
anymore, right? And he was starting for Miami. That was the major issue, right? He
Yeah.
averaged what 8 points, 4 assists, right? Like and 3.5 rebounds and a
Yeah.
little over a steal. 39 from three, which is nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it had kind of been trending downwards the last couple of seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so obviously, I would imagine his role in Philly is going to be different because he's going to be a backup. And he'll help probably stabilize the second unit. Obviously he can still pass. He can still kind of help you in transition. By throwing the ball up the floor. So again, like, is it an upgrade over Patrick Beverly? In some ways, I think as like a more natural playmaking point guard, yeah, right? Because that's a guy that can probably help set up Embiid offensively a little bit better than Patrick Beverly, who's more like a hustle 3-and-D type point guard. Um, but how significant of a move is it? I don't necessarily know. But I think it gives you a guy who's been in big playoff games. He was on a championship team. in the Raptors and was a big part of that. He's just at a different point in his career, right? He's 37, and he's going to be playing more of a minor role. But again, it's a minimum contract, and you're getting a guy who should probably still be a decent backup point guard because he played relatively fine for Miami as a backup point guard last year, in the playoffs, right? Because that was kind of what happened for them, right? That was one of the things that kind of changed their season a little bit. Was Lowry was hurt, he came back, and then he was the backup point guard for the second unit, and still played a lot, still would close sometimes. But if he can kind of fill that role, that will help. And he is a guy that doesn't mind taking charges, doesn't mind getting physical. So he's not like he doesn't play scared. So I think he'll probably help them. It's just a matter of again, can Embiid come back? That's really the main thing. Can he come back? And if he comes back, is he 100%? Because that's really the key to Philly season. If all of this doesn't matter if Embiid isn't able to come back and be the MVP guy that he was before he got hurt.
Yeah, and that's facts. With Kyle Lowry though, it's not a game changing move. It's not an earth shattering move. It will make a difference. I think.
And for the buyout market, that's the norm.
Yeah, and it's like I think he will make a difference because I think the key takeaway is he's most likely better than Cam Payne. I think you trust Kyle Lowry a little bit more than Cam Payne, so you do feel better about that. Having Kyle Lowry as your backup point guard behind Tyrese Maxey, but like you were saying, this all doesn't really mean anything if Embiid doesn't come back. So that's the real question that I would have is Embiid coming back? But regardless, I think this is a smart move. You are adding more depth to your roster, and I think Philly has to feel good about getting Kyle Lowry for very cheap.
Yeah. And it's also a guy that played for Nick Nurse, in Toronto, right? That was the guy that he won championship with, and it seems like they have a really good relationship. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't be there. So
yeah, and he's been to the finals a decent chunk of time, so he does have that experience.
Yeah. So and then next up, the next guy is Bismack Biyombo, right? Because obviously, this list will probably become more extensive as we get a little bit deeper because some guys haven't been bought out yet, and then some teams just haven't made decisions yet.
Yeah.
But Bismack Biyombo, right? He played for Memphis earlier in the year, right? Started most of the season for them, right? In the 30 games they played, he started 27 of them, played 24 minutes a night, which is probably the most he's played like in a while, right? Because I think for Phoenix, it was probably like 14, 15 minutes a game. Yeah, it's the second most minutes per game of his career.
Yeah.
So, at age 31, average 5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 1 block a game. So 56 from the field, right? Which is, kind of interesting considering it's not like he's really taking jump shots, but, regardless, he's still a better finisher around the basket than he was like early in his career, right? Like if you look at his first 2 seasons, it was like 46, 45 from the field, which is pretty bad. So, again, just a roller guy, shot blocker, rebounder, physical guy for Oklahoma City. It is a backup big man, right? So it's like it will help you. He'll help you get some rebounds. He'll help you block some shots. He is undersized, so that's kind of one thing where it's like he's what like 6'8".
Yeah.
And he's a little bit older, so he's not quite as bouncy as he was before. But in theory, it should help. It should be better than what they had, right? Because say like against Dallas, there were stretches where it was like Kenrich Williams, as the backup center spot, and he's not a center, right? He's like a forward. I mean, he's what like 6'6".
Mm-hmm.
So he's more of like a small ball 4, right? 3-4. He's not a center, right? So just having a guy that is like a legitimate okay backup center, that should probably help, right? You're not looking for offense for him because you don't need that, if you're Oklahoma City. You're just looking for more physicality and toughness and some interior defense and rebounding. And, for a minimum contract, that's fine, right? Obviously, maybe you'd like somebody with a little more size. And obviously, like, in terms of his style of play, like, and what he does, it's not really the same as a lot of their other guys, right? Where it's more so like skilled guys that can do stuff with the ball in their hands. But either way, again, it's a better option than, any other of the centers in free agency because there's just not really any. And considering that it wasn't like a lot of bigs got traded, say like, Andre Drummond didn't get moved, or anybody else of that caliber, right? Like it's a better option than what it was before. So like, does it change their life? Probably not, but it's still better than what it was before because you needed a backup big man.
Yeah. I think you have to feel pretty good about this if you're OKC because you did address your needs. You got somewhat of a decent rebounder an okay rim protector, and a physical guy. Like you were saying, you did address something that I think has been a glaring issue for OKC at times. They do tend to get bullied, um, due to size and whatnot. So, you did get a center. I mean, he's not like a traditional center because he's not like 6'10", 7 feet. He's 6'8". But regardless, he does bring things to the table that I think OKC was lacking. So you do have to feel good about it, and it's on a budget, so you didn't really
Yeah.
have to pay like a crazy amount of money for a guy like that.
Yeah, and I do kind of wonder, like, are there ever going to be minutes like if he plays like next to a Chet, or is he just going to have minutes where like if Chet's off the floor, then he's just like the lone
That's a good
backup big man?
question.
That's kind of something that I'd be interested in seeing because Chet is mobile enough, right, where you could kind of like have him roam around and do whatever he wants defensively while Biombo's in the paint.
Yeah.
Or is it like I said, just going to be a scenario where it's like he's the lone backup big, and then everybody else is just going to play whatever they normally do.
Yeah, I think it could work both ways. Honestly, I'm intrigued
Mhm.
by
Yeah,
it. Like you
right.
said, it's not
That's what I think.
it's not an earth shattering move. It's not a difference maker, but it does make you feel a little bit better with your center rotation.
Right. It's better than what you had before. Because again, like if you're going against a team that has some size, like now at least you can put like another center out there, so that way, like again, if you're playing, I don't know, Minnesota, or if you're playing Denver, right? You're gonna feel better about having Bismack Biyombo out there than Kenrich Williams. Is it still great? No, not necessarily. But again, it would be even worse than what you had before. And that's kind of the thing where it's like, it's better to do something that makes you at least even like a little better, right? Than like than not do anything at all, right? Like
Yeah,
say even from LA's perspective, like at least you can say we did add a guy, in Spencer Dinwiddie. It's not like we just completely stood pat and just didn't add anybody, right?
right.
Like even like small moves like that, you never know. It could all, can change your life. Like I mean, again, like you said, and like I said, they're not earth-shattering moves, but you're still better than what you were before,
Yeah,
right? And that's kind of the goal. The goal is to be better than what you already were
it's an
and put
improvement.
yourself in a better position. Because you never know. Like there could be like that. Say for Philly, let's say Embiid is healthy. There could be that random stretch like in a big fourth quarter where like Kyle Lowry makes a few plays. And then all of a sudden, like Philly goes from being down like 5 at the start of the fourth to being up by like 3 or 4,
Yeah,
and then that like that small type of stuff could be huge, like in a big playoff game or something like that. Or say
exactly.
Bismack Biyombo in the second quarter comes in and blocks a couple of shots, and Oklahoma City gets a few fast break possessions. You just never know. So that's something where again these moves I think are fine. Are they the biggest moves of the trade deadline or regular season? No, but they are things where they could they could make a difference for some of these teams, and again, it makes you better.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, obviously, now that the trade deadline is over, right? There's no real, rumors or anything that we really have to discuss. Now it's kind of, we're, approaching the All Star, weekend, right? I think it's basically what next weekend.
yeah.
So that's going to be kind of cool, to see the All Star weekend in Indiana, right? I think some of the events. I think they did a better job in terms of putting some of these people in there, right? Like, say for the skills challenge, they have the Pacers guys, which I think is going to be better than seeing the Antetokounmpo bros,
Yeah, that
right?
was the yeah.
I think that's going to be better than seeing that. We got some interesting players in the 3-point contest, right? Like guys like Malik Beasley. I believe Lillard's going to be in it as
Hmm.
well, right? And others. The dunk contest I think is going to be interesting because I
Was it
feel like
Mac
there are
McClung
other
again?
guys that I. You said
It's
what?
Mac McClung again, right?
Yeah, Mac McClung's in there. Jaquez is going to be in there. Jalen Brown's also going to be in there, which I think is cool because
That's
that's,
fire.
when was the last time that we had like an all-star caliber guy, in the dunk contest? It's been a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is where, and I think Jacob Toppin, who I think is Obi Toppin's brother, he's
Yep.
going to be in it. So,
And the
it should
court,
be an
the
interesting.
LED court or whatever, like it's supposed to
Yeah,
like light up and stuff.
exactly. So that's going to be interesting. But anyways, regardless, again, keep an eye out for, we have the Discord now, so join our Discord server. If you want to, be a part of our community. Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you Friday.